Hello people of YouTube, my name is Brad. This is my channel Animate Orange. Welcome to the review video for a recently built ICONX or Premium Series bicycle. I have the model right here. Recently put this together. So of course now it's time for me to do a little review of this bike. And to start with, it turned out a lot bigger than I expected it to be. It is a very nice sized model. Didn't expect it to be quite this big. You know, you usually think of the Premium Series or ICONX models as being larger, but sometimes they're not that much bigger. Now, we don't really have a Metal Earth size bicycle to compare it to, but it definitely turned out of a good size. So to start off my review, I just kind of want to walk through some of the assembly process because I do want to point out some areas that maybe I had difficulty with or some of the things that I encountered with this build, because it was a fun build, but it definitely had challenges in it, mainly because it is a pretty delicate frame. There's a lot of little flaps and side pieces to bend over and shape. It's not a bunch of larger boxes that you fold up and connect together. It's a lot of thin parts, as you can see. This bicycle frame, the wheels, the pedals, it's all a thin framework that you're working with here. So it does have a larger than usual aspect of delicateness to it, I guess you could say. But to start with this build, you begin by building a wheel, the rear wheel to be precise, and it kind of brought back memories of the penny farthing that I built. I had some difficulty shaping the wheel of that penny farthing from what I remember. Now, whether it's just different and they've improved the process, or I've done quite a few models since then, I'm not sure, but I had a much easier time building the wheel on this model than I did on the penny farthing. It's pretty straightforward. It came together pretty easily. I do remember, you've got two halves that come together, and they basically, for the inside part, tabs fold over back and forth to hold it together. And I had a lot of trouble with that, lining it up with the penny farthing. But with this, once I got the two halves together, before I pinched the rim and folded tabs over, I went ahead and pre-bent all the tabs at least halfway, so that it would be easier to fold them the rest of the way over when it came together. And that worked out pretty easily. And then you build like an outside part of the wheel. I had a little trouble with that, bending those bazillion flaps over because it kind of warped the wheel as I was doing that, but I was able to flatten it back out, put the inside in, put the two halves together with the rear wheel. It kept wanting to slide out. I don't know why, it just did, and I fought with it, but I eventually got it in there and got all the pieces seamed or closed up around it. All in all, not a big deal, fairly straightforward and easy to understand. There are several hints in the instructions. You've got arrows on either side. You want to make sure they're both, it says pointing up. Honestly, you want to make sure when you're putting the two halves together, they're both pointed in the same direction. And then later on, make sure they're pointed up as you're adding parts. But make sure those arrows are pointing in the same directions, and you're bringing the two halves together, and it will go easier. And then we move on basically to the chain and sprocket area. That comes up right after you're doing the wheel. And I got a little bit confused about that. There's two-part tins that kind of sandwich on top of each other, and it confused me a little bit, and I had difficulty telling where the two tabs on the rear of the sprocket went into, or rear of the chain went into the sprocket area. Basically, try to explain this. The way it's laid out in the instructions, the assembly of the sprocket and chain are kind of off to one side after where it shows you to put the top piece on, so it kind of threw me for a loop at first, but I finally figured out that what happens is both tins, because you have two different tins, they have probably a few more slots than you need. They both have slots for you to attach the chain, and if you hold it up, there's like a set of two in the middle, and there's two kind of offset in the back. The two offset in the back, if you hold it the right orientation, are where the chain attached to. But then the two in the middle, there's two this way and two that way. If I remember correctly, two this way attach to the bike frame and piece, and the two that are this way end up kind of going on top. And both pieces have those tabs or those slots, but they don't both need them, and rather than making it two different parts that are very similar, they just made them both the same part, gave them all the slots that they needed, and you only use what you need of the slots for each one. And they just kind of confused me for a bit, because I'm always looking to make sure that I'm filling up all the slots with tabs and not missing anything, and it just threw me for a loop. You kind of have to move over to the right side and assemble the chain, the back of the chain, and the sprocket or middle piece or whatever you want to call it, and then that goes on top of the wheel, and then above that you want to assemble that piece with the other 10 and part 9, the little piece on top, and then you set that on top of the chain. So the way they ordered it kind of threw me off, but once I figured it out, it was pretty easy to understand. And then you start building this middle framework, and you have this one arm, it's kind of hidden behind that plate. You have this one arm that goes back for the wheel, and the way it's oriented confused me and didn't make a lot of sense until it started coming together. You start building the middle framework, and then you start dealing with the sprocket and the pedal for the front part of the chain. And I will tell you that I found assembling the pedal, you assemble one at a time. You do one side, later on you do the other. I found assembling the pedal quite satisfying. For whatever reason, that was the most satisfying part of this build. It was very straightforward. It was thin, narrow parts, but it came together really easily. It made a lot of sense. And then a little bit of difficulty getting the chains and everything aligned, but once I worked that out, not difficult. It came together, trying to wedge things in sideways and get what's on top of what should be on top and what's underneath should be underneath. And once you get that sorted out, it comes together fairly easily. And once things are attached, you begin to understand how the frame is supposed to be oriented, because I expected this piece that was back here to actually be the front wheel piece, and just the way it comes together is a little bit odd. But once you get the frame and the back wheel, it begins to make sense how this is coming together. And then from there you go on to make this rear sort of carrying platform and this piece that angles down here that also holds the wheel on part of the frame. And then there's like a long strip that ultimately goes in between here. It took some time to do that, just because there's so many parts to bend over and shape and put together, and it's definitely one of those parts where you have to slow down and take your time and make sure you're bending and shaping everything correctly. It's kind of delicate work. Don't get going too fast, get ahead of yourself, but in the end it comes together really nicely if you just take your time and make sure you're bending things properly and shaping things properly. It just slows you down because it's so many thin pieces you have to work with carefully to get everything together. I will say that when you're putting this piece here and this angled back piece that are ultimately attached to the wheel, when you're putting those two together, they come together at very much a right angle, and the way the end is flat makes it go that way. But then in instructions you see it's supposed to be angled back, and I'm like, well, why didn't you angle the edge of it when it attaches to accommodate for that? It just made it flat. It's not hard to bend it so that it goes back and attaches in, but at first it's like, did I put that together right? Because it really wants to go at an angle, 90-degree angle, and not angled back like you're supposed to. But it flexes back, it comes together, the two pieces of the frame hold it together really well. It's just something that kind of stands out to me, how when you get to that part, if it's at a 90-degree angle, don't worry too much, it'll flex and work itself out as you assemble the rest. There is a bit where you have to go back and fold the chain over so that you actually see the detailed part facing out. The seat is fairly straightforward, just some tedious shaping. I did have some difficulty getting this front tab to lay down flat. I never actually did. I just kind of got it most of the way in there and gave up on it, because the more I fought with it, the more I was sure I was going to warp things. And then we start building this front section right here, and I did make a little bit of a mistake and missed an important detail. When you're assembling this front section, and this what is, I'm guessing, part of the braking system, there's part 43 in there, attaches kind of inside, and I didn't first notice that it's important you shape it, or not shape it, but put it the right way. There's two ways to put it, the right way and the wrong way. One end of part 43 has 3 tabs on it, and the other end only has 1. The 1 tab needs to be facing down for things to come together right. And I didn't do it that way and had to fight with and take it back off, which caused me to warp the heck out of things, put it back on, and then try my best to shape things back again. But pay attention to part 43 and make sure you put it on so that the 3 slabs are facing up and the 1 is down, because the 1 pairs with 1 on the other side for the brake piece to come together and everything to orient correctly. I did skip making the front wheel. Before you do that, you do make the front wheel that comes together just like the back, minus the extra sprockets and stuff. After doing the back one, the first one came together even easier than the last. And then the handlebars, again, just kind of tedious, a bit of shaping and bending stuff and curling the ends and putting the bell on, and it's kind of delicate work with this model just because there's so much thin framework that you can easily warp if you're not careful and supporting things properly and taking your time and doing it the careful way. Beyond that, the way the front wheel attaches is fairly obvious. You have back here, kind of going back, you have these pieces that come down and attach to different tabs and slots that you have to bend out. You also have these fenders, which aren't as obvious on the model because they sit so flush with it. But you have a rear fender and a front fender, or wheel guard, whatever you want to call it, that goes on, and they're pretty straightforward to shape. One thing that I would advise before you start putting those parts on, make sure the two arms that attach to the wheel are fanned out good. Just go ahead and fan them out and give them plenty of room so they don't catch on the sprockets when you're putting it on there, to slide it up where it needs to be, and then put them over whatever tab. Make sure that whatever tab that they need to go over has already been out ahead of time, so you don't have to fight in a tight space or limited space to get that right, and then we'll come together easier. And then of course you have a little guard for the chain that comes on pretty late in the build, if not almost the last thing. And one thing that I had never noticed until building it is it has a little stand that attaches to the rear of it. I don't think that's normally how the bike stand works, but for this model it's a good idea. It helps it stand up on its own. So there's this little kind of delicately shaped bike stand that attaches to the back, and that way the bike will stand up and look really nice on your display. And because of the way it is, it doesn't really stand out. And like I said, I didn't even notice it in the model until I got to that part and started building it. I was like, oh, it's got a stand in here, not just a regular kickstand like the Kawasaki. Kawasaki bike has just a regular kickstand, and if you're not careful, that kickstand will bend over and eventually break off. I haven't broken mine yet, but I've had to fix it a couple of times or bend it back, and I know it's getting weaker. But I do like that this is a wider, more stable stand than what the Kawasaki came with. Though I imagine the Kawasaki would look ridiculous with a stand like that. Now, I kind of mentioned this in the build videos. This is an older ICONX model, or premium series, back when they called them ICONX. It's a bit of an older one, so I expected it to not be as complicated and difficult as some of the newer stuff. Again, I'm pointing at the Star Wars models. The Imperial Star Destroyer, the ICONX version, was a very complex model and took time. So I didn't expect this to take as much time being an older model, but at the same time it is a premium series or ICONX version, so it is expected to have more detail and more complexity to it. So I did expect it to take some time. In the end, it took about 3 hours and 15 minutes. For whatever reason, I was thinking it wouldn't even take that long, but in reality, for an ICONX model, 3 hours and 15 minutes is not bad. There is fantastic amount of detail in this model, just simply because it's a lot of just thin railed framework, and it just really slows you down having to bend all of these little flaps all over these different thin rails, and to do them right, do them carefully so that you won't warp things, and it just takes time. The fact that all of that took 3 hours and 15 minutes is not bad at all. Sounds about right in the end. Kind of surprised at first when I did the calculations, when I added up all the video and said, wow, it took 3 hours and 15 minutes. But then once I thought about it, yeah, that makes perfect sense. This is a fantastic model, and I'm kind of ashamed at myself for, I won't say disappointed, but surprised I put it off for so long. Had I known that it was such a fantastic model and an enjoyable build, maybe I would have done it sooner. But then again, you know, it's always a matter of, there's so many things I want to build, plus I do try to spend some time building things people request or ask for. I believe this was a request that somebody asked for, which is why I finally got around to doing it, and I'm thankful for those requests because they sometimes turn me on to models I might not have otherwise been that interested in. I really like this. I really enjoyed this model. This was kind of like the castle, I believe it was the Kankakuji castle. I really didn't expect much from that build. It was a request, and I built it, and I loved it. This is another one. I didn't really expect much from this. It just seemed like a plain old bike, but I really enjoyed the model, and I'm really enjoying having it on the shelf behind me. It's fantastic. It's a really nice size. It's a lot of detail. It's really well done, and it's got a nice amount of challenge to it to just kind of slow you down, steady your mind, and make you focus on getting that done and getting that done right. Fantastic Fascinations, well done. I'm sorry I missed this older model for so long. Beyond that, I could just keep rambling on about the same old things. That pretty much is it. Just take your time and be careful with the delicate pieces and take deep breaths and breaks if you have to. A couple of notes about the instructions, like, you know, the chain kind of, it seems to go out of order, but if you study it, it's not hard to figure out. And again, with that one part up here, let me double check and make sure I give you the right part number. Part 43, just make sure that the 3 tabs are up top and the 1 tab is down bottom, and you'll have a lot easier time than I did. Had I not made that mistake, maybe it would have only taken 3 hours. Who knows? Still though, 3 hours and 15 minutes for this, absolutely worth it. Fantastic build. And I do want to add, I think it's just a little bit funny and ironic with this build. I fairly recently been job hunting, and I posted in my last news video that I got an offer from a local hospital doing cleaning work. But one of the positions that I gave a try to was an assembler job, where you go to stores and you put together whatever they need, patio, furniture, grills, bookcases, bikes, whatever you need, whatever they need, you go put it together. And at the time that I went and did it, everybody's buying bikes, and they also like to train you on bikes, because apparently that's the most challenging, most difficult part. And I do like to put things together. I like to take them apart, put them together. I'm in the process of pulling the engine out of an old Ranger and putting a new one in. I like working with tools and mechanical stuff. And I find it a little bit funny that, you know, this job came up, I went and gave it a try, and I didn't like it. Not that I had a problem putting the bikes together, but it was just kind of a situation where it was a big strain on hurry up and hurry up and hurry up and hurry up. And there was hurry up and do it right, hurry up and do it right. And no, I don't like that. You know, I respect that I need to move in a timely fashion, but I also really need to take the time to do this right. And it didn't seem to be a good mix. But I just find it funny that for a short bit, without any planning at all, tried a bike assembling job just to end up not doing that, but coming home and putting together a Metal Earth or ICONX bicycle. I find that just a little bit funny how that works out. A little bit funny. I'm going to leave it at that. Story time is over. I'll keep going if I don't stop. Thank you for watching. As always, thank you to my Patreon supporters for continuing to support this channel. And another bit of irony, I've got another speeder bike to go work on. I just finished that, and I've got to work on that review for Star Wars. I'll thank you for watching, and as always, keep on keeping on.